This guy had more money than any of us can even comprehend. They said he was $500 million in debt. I can't even comprehend that kind of money, much less even getting that far in debt. I wouldn't trade places with his life for nothing. That poor fella, he had a miserable life. Had incredible talent, had all the money in the world, had fame beyond measure. Terrible life. And that's just this generation's version. Go back a generation and it was Elvis Presley. Almost identical story. Great talent, powerful, beautiful voice. People by the millions would fall at his feet. Had money beyond imagination. By the way, isn't it funny when you look at Graceland today and think that that was the height of luxury back 35 years ago? Would you want to live in Graceland? Man, that's the tackiest, ugliest looking place I've ever seen in my life. But back then, that was the pinnacle. I mean, that place was bigger than the White House. Wouldn't trade places with it for nothing. Dated famous actresses, movie stars, musicians. Had a beautiful woman on his arm everywhere he went. Was riding in a Cadillac everywhere he went. Had more money than he could spend. A private jet. Miserable life. And the sad thing is there was a time when Elvis was pretty close to walking with the Lord. And all that stuff got in the way. It doesn't matter if we're talking about music. It may be that you're a carpenter. It might be that you're a writer, a teacher. It doesn't matter. A ball coach. Whatever your inclination is, whatever your talent is, whatever your ability is, whatever your gift is, whatever it is that you're good at, put it in the hands of the Master, and He'll make your life worthwhile. He may not make you rich and famous, because you know what? Being rich and famous may be the worst thing that ever happened to you. Remember Solomon? Solomon was such a wise man. We turn to him so often because he's got this great insight on life. He wrote the book of Proverbs predominantly, and who among us hasn't turned to that book for wisdom and advice countless times? If you've got children at home, read about the first 7 chapters especially, really the whole book, but especially those first 7 chapters of the book of Proverbs, and listen to the advice and wisdom that he gives you about raising your children. Things to instill in the heart of your child, things to make sure you teach your child, things to make sure you know as a parent. Wise, wise man. Worst thing that happened to him was all of his riches. You read the book of Ecclesiastes, I think that the book of Ecclesiastes was written at the end of his life. It's kind of like a deathbed confessional, in my opinion. Any of you seen the movie Citizen Kane? I'm probably going to ruin it for you if you hadn't, but if you hadn't seen it by now, chances are you're not going to see it. It's about 70 years old. But Citizen Kane is a fictional story based upon the life of a real man, William Randolph Hearst, the first probably media tycoon that the world ever knew. He owned radio stations, he owned newspapers, he owned television stations. When it came to media, he was the king of media. Very, very powerful man. And it's believed that Orson Welles based the character Citizen Kane on him. I don't know whether or not he did. But in the movie, Citizen Kane becomes a media mogul. He becomes an elected official, becomes one of the most powerful men in the world. He amasses a fortune that the world has never known. He lives in this magnificent castle called Shangri-La. And at the end of the movie, when he's on his deathbed, there's one person in the room with him, and that's a nurse that he's hired to take care of him. And the words that are rolling off of his tongue as he dies, you see the movie opens with him calling out for Rosebud. And you think, well, is Rosebud a girlfriend, a child? Who is this Rosebud? You find out at the end of the movie, Rosebud is a sled, the name of a sled that he had when he was just a little boy, when he was in abject poverty, and that was the only possession that he had that was worth anything. And here's this man at the end of his life, having been rich and famous beyond his wildest imagination, and when he's dying, the words that fall off his lips as he dies alone in his mansion refers to a toy he had as a child. And the moral of the movie was meant to be what a wasted life this man had. You know, that story is taken almost directly from the book of Ecclesiastes. You could insert Solomon in the place of Citizen Kane, or maybe you should flip it, insert Citizen Kane in the place of Solomon. You got the same story. He grows up with every privilege. His father is the king. He inherits a kingdom that is at the pinnacle of its existence. Never in the history of Israel would they be more powerful, have a larger border, a greater military, and have more money and be at a greater time of peace. When he took the throne, it was the absolute best time in the history of the nation. And then when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, he goes through and he catalogs everything he has. He describes all his palaces and his houses. He describes for us they didn't have CD players and radios back then, so he had choirs that lived in his house. If he wanted music, summon the choir. They'd come and sing to him. He had orchestras. If he wanted to listen to music, bring the orchestra in, they'd play for him. Anything he saw that he wanted, he actually says that. If his eyes saw it and he wanted it, he had it. Now, can you imagine living that existence? You realize that part of the fun of wanting things is just the wanting of them? It's not the getting of them, because once you get it, it's over, right? Have you ever wanted something so bad? Maybe you even saved up for it. Maybe you dropped hints. Maybe you circled in a catalog. Maybe you tore pictures out and put them on the refrigerator. Made your Christmas list, and you wanted it, and you wanted it, and you wanted it, and all you could think, you're so excited, and you finally get it. Guess what? Excitement's over now, isn't it? Now you have it, and in 6 months' time, you'll be wanting something else, if it takes that long. Solomon didn't know what that was like. If he saw it and he wanted it, he had it. And that included people. Remember, this man had more wives and concubines than any other man that lived. If he wanted it, he had it. But when you read chapter 3, these words are so haunting. Down around verse number 17, Solomon says, I hated life. When I see Michael Jackson, when I see Elvis Presley, when I see different celebrities who have it all and they take their own lives or they destroy their own lives with drugs and alcohol and they're miserable, I think of Solomon, who had everything and said, I want to die. Now, thankfully, Solomon at the end of his life realized all the blessings that I've received, all the talents that I have, I need to turn them over to God. He closes that letter by saying in chapter 12 and verse 13, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. The moral of the story. Here's the point, he says. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God will bring into judgment every thought, every word, and every secret thing. Solomon understood that the whole point of my existence is to put my life in the Master's hands. Now,